So good morning. Good morning. Good. I'm going to talk about the Research Ethics Committee's request for data sharing plan as part of ethics review process. The data from the National Research Ethics Committee survey. So I'm going to introduce this talking about the Dominican Republic, the health system, the health research system, and also want to comment on a paper that we published on the ethical challenges arising from the Zika epidemic. Uh, and then I want to conclude, to comment on some ethical issues that we think are important in this case. And we are going to conclude uh, talking about why we believe it is important to have in place some kind of policy for ethics committees in contests as the Dominican Republic. Oh, Punta Cana. What is this? Who put this slide? Sorry. Uh, just to let you know, Punta Cana is not a country. So many people go to Dominican Republic as tourists, and they don't know the name of the country. They just know Punta Cana. So I just want to clarify that. And I learned also, I would like to show, as our colleague from Taiwan, that this is Dominican Republic, and we are here. Okay? Uh, this is very important because of this. To look close to Dominican Republic, we share the island with Haiti. Okay, and we are close to Cuba, to Jamaica, to Puerto Rico, and to we have Randall from Grenada. So from the Caribbean, we have around more than 20 islands sharing this part of the world. And to come here to the Global Forum, I had to go to Costa Rica right here because we don't have a consulate in Dominican Republic. I called to Venezuela right here, and then I flew to La Habana, Cuba, to find the visa, to get the visa. So I'm glad that I made it here to the Global Forum. And that's why this is a global forum, because then I flew to Miami, to London to be here. So I'm really glad to be here this year. So the Dominican Republic is really a middle income country. We have around 10 million inhabitants. And also, we, as I mentioned, we occupied 1/3 of the Hispaniola island. For you, it's important to remember that Christopher Columbus landed there. So we were the first European settlement in the Americas. One of the things that will be nice to know is that the capital is Santo Domingo, not Punta Cana, remember? And over the last 2 decades, the Dominican Republic has had one of the fastest growing economies in the Americas. It's also the most visited destination in the Caribbean. However, the health insurance coverage is this year we got until this number a few years ago we have less than 50% of health coverage of Social Security. The health expenditure on health is greater than 6%, but in reality, the government, this is taking all the sources, but the funding from the government to the Ministry of Health is less than 2%, around 1%. The other pockets expenditures is really high, one of the greatest in the Americas. The health resource is governed by the Ministry of Health, and they have written a policy on health research. It's really just a paper. The Ministry of Higher Education, Science, and Technology, which is the MESIT, is the main public research funding agency. But there is a big gap on health research that we can say that most of the research is really done by the pharmaceutical industry. So really, health research directed toward the needs of those of the most poor and vulnerable is almost absent. So in the Dominican Republic in 2016, we were hit by the Zika virus. epidemic outbreak. And we had one of the greatest numbers there in terms of the population. The WHO at that time oriented towards these actions. It basically was to orient our all the stakeholders' action towards the detection, prevention, care support, and research. So at that moment, we thought that it would be nice to document how low middle income country as Dominican Republic react to an epidemic in terms of research, not in terms of detection, prevention, and care of support, because the Ministry of Health have this, let's say, a strength. But what about research? So we wanted we were participating in the forum in Annecy, France, and the topic of that moment at that time was epidemics, research during epidemics. So we want to review what happened and to document what happened in a country as Dominican Republic. So, and we identified some ethical challenges for international collaborative research partnerships at that moment. And we found that national researchers were not participating as meaningful collaborators in international research efforts. There were complaints that participation and sharing of responsibilities were not optimal at all. So there are unwanted effects of the lack of governance on the city because we are not well organized. We cannot respond to epidemics in terms of research. We cannot even help in the international context to, let's say, to invite researchers and do research in our city. And this is a difficult task locally, but also it makes it difficult for those that want to conduct research. So also the last study as a background for this case, it was a survey that we conducted on ethics committees in the Dominican Republic that was published in 2011. So we wanted to update also that information regarding the ethics committees. And we aim to identify the numbers of ethics committees in the Dominican Republic, also to see basically the structure, composition, what written documents they have, and their organization, and just a little bit, not too deep into the ethics review and decision-making process. So we got to contact with around 400 healthcare organizations, academic and research-oriented organizations, both from the public and private sectors. We conducted this from 2017, the data collection phase, and September 2018. We identified 25 in ethics committees and 20 completed the survey. So one of the study results. So those are preliminary. We're still working on this, but we got to analyze. It was quite easy to analyze if they request some data sharing plan to those submitting a protocol to them. It was easy to analyze because none of them actually request a data sharing plan. There are no written policies. There are any terminology regarding data sharing in their written policies. The standard operational procedures and or templates were basically inexistent. So this is our work on development, and I really appreciate the inputs from Jantina and for our group. And those are really honest questions. You will see questions because I don't have any response to this, because in our experience regarding this topic in DDR is quite limited. So probably for you, some question will be obvious. I'm not sure. I think that could be part of the discussion, and I could learn from you many things. But I believe that an issue would be reasonable for ethics committee to request for data sharing plan. Although some guidelines suggest that there are compelling reasons to share data, but would the researcher have a duty to respond to that request, even though in a legal sense, this is a regulated component in many LMICs? I'm not sure, because we have another issue. If I don't like this ethics committee, I go to other ethics committee. I could always go to a number of ethics committee until I got what I need. Thus, the decision to ask for data sharing plan applies to any type of research, and regardless of the sponsor institution. Because what I see is that some sponsor institutions that have already established these kind of policies. But I'm asking not from the sponsor side, I asking myself as an ethics committee member to see if we also need to have this, but we need some policy regarding this to develop them. Should data from LMICs be shared internationally, and for what reason? So there is an increased recognition of the importance of collaborative research globally. I have a but here also. But what kind of international cooperation would be needed to promote equitable data sharing? It's not just a matter of, it's not a matter of any kind of sponsor. There are different kind of organizations going there to do research. Could be universities, could be also uh, not that big international organizations, probably NGOs conducting research, and they have, I don't know, if they have any clue regarding what means ethics in terms of following some steps. Who is going to monitor this? That's a huge question that I think it came out yesterday from one for in our groups. So talking about some kind of audit of these issues. Who is going to follow up? Could the capacity building efforts be demanded as integral part of data sharing plan? I don't believe that just sharing your data solves the issue. Probably it's going to be a greater issue to have a data that you cannot analyze, that you don't have the expertise to analyze. So I think that things are getting really more difficult for ethics committee because they might be asking for more things. And probably this could be annoying for some researchers. What if local agency on health research is minimum? Who cares? That's the big question for us. I mean, in my context, this is a big question. Who cares about all of this that we are talking about, locally speaking? It's just not a matter of international responsibility. We need also to promote some local agency here. So lack of action at developing the health research system is an outstanding issue in some countries that I know, like say in Central America, for example. Okay, this is an outstanding issue. So collaborative work encompasses fair sharing, beginning by identifying and empowering local research teams, allowing them to participate in all phases of the study. I think that this is, all of us agree with this, but probably it's not the case when we are just in the field, not just in the data collection phase. So to promote the inclusion and education of data scientists as part of the research team in LMICs will prompt and facilitate ownership of the data. I think that we learned from the Sri Lanka example yesterday that this could be done. So some conclusions. I think that there is a need to advocate for policies on data sharing and biobanking in our countries. Especially, we need to think on the role of ethics committees. And there is that much studies right now talking about ethics committees, but in our context, basically we're still having a huge gap. There are no guidelines for ethics committee in the Dominican Republic. So the government basically does or promote double review of protocols. So you need to go through an independent ethics committee first before going to ask for the government for ethics review. But the news are not that good news, is that they accept any kind of ethics committee. Could be internationally. Could not be an ethics committee from the Dominican Republic, and that may pose some vulnerabilities. So I believe that ethics committees or its networks should discuss about this, the feasibility of including data and biobanking terms within their written policies, determining when and how a data sharing plan should be requested as a part of the research protocol. Sharing data, and this is my belief regarding this. Sharing data example to be allowed only to those offering or having in place strong data sharing plans to avoid potential abuses or an unequitable sharing. Uh, Also, and I'm concluding, the National Council of Bioethics in Health, which is the CONABIOS in the Dominican Republic, should offer guidance to ethics committees in terms of policies and standards on data sharing biobanking. Also, this institution, the Science, Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Health, should work together in the development of a platform for data and support access. So I'm not going to stay to talk more on this, but just to end with some recommendations. I think that open debates at this one could be replicated and are very needed in our region. Uh, we need to include researchers, funding agencies, and the community representatives to clarify basic questions regarding the meaning, the pros and cons of data sharing. And the collaborative efforts on research ethics are increasing in Latin America, and these groups also could help to disseminate this information. So I want to thank reviewers on my presentation. Uh, I want, which is Argentina. I want to thank also the steering committee for the invitation and a colleague from Cuba who helped out a lot getting the visa, which Jose Acosta Sariego Pepe. Thank you. That's all.
This is a question for clarification. You mentioned including capacity building in this concept of what the ethics committee. Were you thinking there specifically of capacity building for analysis and for data management, or were you thinking of capacity building more broadly, which I think many funders, external funders anyway, would probably demand to see a plan?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, we're thinking broadly. Although I think also that this is like a very specific and highly specialized area. So I think that we could, why not, to think also on developing data analysis capacity. There is a huge gap in terms of data analysis. I myself, I am a psychologist, but I just start like trying to learn about these things, big data. So I think that all of us, this is the new language of our world. And I think that there is a need to strengthen capacity building, specifically on data sharing.
Thank you, Julio, for the nice presentation. Mine is not a question per se, but maybe just a comment because the presentation has sparked an interest in me. The issue of capacity building, and when you were finishing your presentation, you talked about your national government providing funds for research. And I'm looking at an aspect of funders, like in Malawi, we normally collect money for capacity building, but that money goes back to the government. And whether it comes back to the research community to build the capacity, which is stipulated, that one I cannot say. But I'm looking at an aspect of funders. Funders are bringing in capacity, but how are the governments within our communities sustaining that is another thing which we need to look into that. Because I'm looking at funders being vulnerable in this issue of building capacity, whereby the problem may not necessarily be that the funds are not coming for capacity, but the sustainability of the governments to sustain the capacity within the governments.
Thank you.